In the last few years, practice-based research has begun to be taken seriously in the academy, and I think it's a very healthy and stimulating development for a whole number of reasons. Firstly, because it actually challenges what could be perceived as rather tired forms of traditional academic formats in using film to talk about film, using sound and image to talk about sounds and images, in actually using other digital media to talk about other subjects in the humanities and other disciplines. It begins to refresh and change the format which I recently heard described as an academic essay that's 8,000 words with 30 subtitles and read by 7 people.
Down just so I can frame it. Yeah, it has to go a bit further back.
Can I go ahead?
Yeah.
Is it too dark to increase it like that?
No, it's fine now. Yeah, it's fine now. So just have one light.
Let's try with one light.
Yeah.
Okay, because
it's okay where it is.
Yeah.
I worked with Duncan Petrie from York University to write a book that was titled Educating Filmmakers, although actually our original intention was it would be called Cultivating Filmmakers for its connection to culture. But interestingly, the publisher cut across our bows and said, you can't use the word cultivating because most books now are found via search engine, and cultivating filmmakers is in danger of putting you in horticulture. So we retitled it Educating Filmmakers. But the book is about the history and the presence and the possible future of film schools, and the way in which the tradition of film schools, Vigik in Moscow from the 20s through the big expansion of film schools in Europe, Łódź in Poland and Paris, and actually Paris and Rome were during the war and set up under Mussolini in Rome. But many more film schools expanding in the post-war years, and the American universities developing filmmaking courses. In different ways, all of those film schools addressed questions of culture, ethics, the outside world, as well as the aesthetics and the techniques of filmmaking. And what I think has developed in quite a serious and unfortunate way is that in the last decade or two, as a result of the pervasion of neoliberalism in institutions and in society, the market has been introduced, and that's led to a shift in film schools towards a craft focus, the techniques of making films, and beginning to reduce or even exclude the consideration of other issues, the filmmaker as a critical practitioner, as a thinking and imaginative artist. Now, I think that that has to be debated and, in fact, resisted. Of course, technique is important. It's crucial to have control of a medium, to produce a clean soundtrack and an image in focus and the color right, but it's also important to have some sense of the alternatives to the standard industrial way of doing things. In fact, it puts shivers up my spine when I heard recently independent producers saying, we think film schools should produce industry-ready students. A phrase which reminds me rather of the supermarket's oven-ready chickens. I think students of course, have to have the means to earn a living, to work in the industry, although hopefully they can begin in perhaps small ways to challenge and change and alter aspects of that industry. Hopefully, by looking at the history of film, there's a possibility of doing other things in different ways.
Transformed, I would confide. I could have cried, I could have died. Transformed to cold from warmth. The warmth, it pacified and purified. The warmth was far within, hidden within. The warmth was deep and far within.
I think Laura Mulvey is most widely known for an essay she wrote, which is certainly the most reproduced, the most referred to, the most famous, stroke infamous essay on film theory called Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, mobilizing psychoanalysis to understand both mainstream film and the alternative to it in terms of spectator position and gender difference on screen and within the spectator. And that brilliant essay has been, as I say, widely reproduced and read and argued about. In fact, there's 4 or 5 books, although all of essays. I mean, I think that, her developing ideas about cinema has always been through the genre of the essay, but that's been informed by being a filmmaker as well. Working initially with Peter Wallen, a film made called Penthesilea, made in the 70s, followed by Riddles of the Sphinx, which very influential, important at the time, British Film Institute supporting it. Shorter films, perhaps less well known, Amy, with an exclamation mark. Amy was about Amy Johnson, the aviatrice, actually separately and subsequently she made a film on her own called Disgraced Monuments, about the statues of Marx and Lenin and other socialist heroes that had been abandoned after the fall of the wall and left in a kind of elephant's graveyard in Moscow and elsewhere. And that process of working with the image to make films, working with actors and editors and sound recorders, informed her later writing, understanding how films signify, how they mean. Although there's always been that relationship with other areas of theory, specifically Freudian theory and Lacanian theory, I think.
Look, you got my number, haven't you? Keith, just ring me, if there's anything. All right. Bye, Anna.
Well, my involvement in Channel 4 was at the beginning of the new enterprise, which was quite a extraordinary and exciting point in time, because the channel was actually supported by some quite special legislation, which said that the channel had a remit to innovate in the form and content of programs, remit to reach audiences that are otherwise not addressed by British television. And those two phrases in the remit, of course, opened a door to do really different things and extend the range of British television. My involvement from 1983 was in independent film and video with Alan Fountain and then Caroline Spry, and we were working in a whole range of genres: low-budget fiction, political documentary, personal documentary, experimental and avant-garde work, feature films from what we call the Third World, direct access programs, people to people, television magazines like Out. It's a while ago now, but it was at the time the first specifically and focused gay program on British television. And that first 10 years of Channel 4 was a bit like, to quote Wittgenstein, rebuilding a ship at sea, working it out as we went. But from programs like Derek Jarman's Blue, an hour of a blue screen, 10 o'clock on 1 October in 93. Claude Lanzmann's Shoah, 7.5 hours of a documentary about the Holocaust. A whole range of programs, I think, fulfilled that remit. In fact, our department, we used to joke and call ourselves the alibi. We always felt we were the alibi of the channel, by which we meant that we were never quite given a big enough budget or enough of the schedule, but images from our programs are all over the annual report because we were fulfilling that remit. I think one of the things that one really needs to remember about the work of Derek Jarman is an extraordinary versatility, and a versatility that's relevant to filmmaking now, in that Derek, of course, was interested in getting agreement and an adequate budget to make a number of 35mm feature films. And from Caravaggio, which was a struggle to make, but eventually got the money to do it with the BFI and Channel 4, through Sebastiani, through Edward VII, he did those large-scale feature films. However, unlike many denizens of contemporary Hollywood, he didn't see it as a sort of escalator, that each film had a bigger budget and he was moving upwards. He actually enjoyed the movement to and fro different scales of production, and would work with a range of friends and accomplices, making Super 8 movies in the meantime. Instead of waiting for the next budget for another larger scale feature, he'd shoot at weekends with John Mabry and Seamus McGarvey and other collaborators. And I think that openness to different forms of film, because the Super 8 films were less narrative, were more image-based, with all the grain of Super 8, and the larger scale films reaching wider audiences through the cinema, was really unique, but exemplary. And it's good if in the modern digital age, people can still do that, shooting, I don't know, maybe a corporate video on Tuesday to Friday, but maybe making something of their own on foot of that. In the end, as he was dying of AIDS and going blind with his retina detaching, he made the absolutely amazing film Blue. He'd been doing a lot of writing over the years anyway, his diaries and Chroma and other books. And so he used that ability to shape a discourse with dialogue and, a single voice, to talk about the color blue, which was Yves Klein's blue, and the experience of an artist losing his sight. I mean, a most awful thing, in a way that meant that it was our privilege to be able to find space at 10 o'clock, which is peak scheduled time, to do something very extraordinary, which is to have a television program with just the color blue radiating outwards. And Radio 3 collaborated, because these were in old FM days before digital radio, and so the two soundtracks were coming out of different speakers on people's radios. People watched it in a special way, often just turning the lights down and letting the blue come out as the voices talk about the color blue, the meaning of the color blue, and Derek's predicament.
You say to the boy, "Open your eyes." When he opens his eyes and sees the light, you make him cry out, saying, "O blue, come forth. O blue, arise. O blue, ascend. O blue, come in."
In the early 80s, the independent film and video department was set up as part of Channel 4, and as part of our job, we saw the necessity of giving a space for filmmakers from the global south to make films and show them directly on British television screens. I mean, there was an old joke that I think Michael Grade made about British television research about the Third World happens mostly in Terminal 3 of Heathrow Airport. Terminal 3 was the international terminal. So his point was that reporters would do some background reading and check a brief on their way to a plane to fly somewhere, where parachute journalism, as we called it, would be the approach. In opposition to that, we asked filmmakers who lived and worked in different parts of Africa, Asia, or Latin America to make films. And to begin with, we did seasons which actually mostly bought existent films. Vietnam cinema, New Cinema of Latin America, Africa on Africa. Those seasons started offering some space for films from what is in fact the majority of the world, but in the insular West, not really looked at very closely, except for the possibilities of tourism and a bit of news coverage for the incessant wars and famines which seemed to happen. And the strength of fiction and documentary films being shown on television enabled us to move forward and actually run and program a series of feature films for 2/3 of the year called Cinema from Three Continents. And that was shown on Sunday nights at 10 o'clock. Very good space to be showing these feature films. And they, in a subtle way, indicated different ways of looking at the world, different ways of being in the world. An example would be a little scene in the middle of Gaston Cabaret's film Zamboko. Gaston Cabaret, working in Burkina Faso, made a film which just has a little scene, two non-professional actors talking to one another about how things are going with the new baby. And as you watch the scene, you hear the subtlety of the way that they talk, singing under each other's voices, in a way you don't find in other cultures. I mean, it's a gentleness, a tenderness that perhaps happens between friends in lots of different places of the world. But this is the specific of a village in West Africa. And for me, it really shows in actually quite a hidden and subtle way the range of other cultures, other human relations available in the world.
Yano ko biga goyinga atibila wana kita saka yinga suma na kita saka yinga Rara pa yinana ko.
Yeah, see that?
Ndo barara ngitwa.
Yes,
Ti jelam do jelam de tam sulo fa sam si tam. Buena mana wana. Mi ko ndo ba koma sa una kelma na juno. Una kelma na juno. Da suma. Ti jak saba.
Ay, lafi bana. Ya mi ro wala mo.
Lafi bela. Ir sab to pusi.
Lafi be.
Lafi bela. Lafi. Pama kama ya. Ora kama tinanya ko konti. Sonro yene lebra wado yele.
Yeah, see that? Oh, fa. Ibarko barka.
Ay,
Ibarko
barka.
Wana pa fongo. Ibarko barka. Ne ken.
When Educating Filmmakers was launched in the London Film School in the summer of 2014, I noticed the editor of Sight and Sound in the back row, and of course paid attention when he raised a question for discussion. He said, in talking about film schools as providing a broader and wider version of education for young filmmakers, are you saying, he asked me, are you saying that they should not only know the films of Tarantino and Scorsese, they should also know the films of Dreyer and Ozu? To which I replied, actually, I go further than that. I think they should know the novels of Dickens, the music of Fauré, the poetry of T.S. Eliot, the paintings of Goya. I mean, obviously not everyone's going to learn everything that fast, but film schools should develop a curiosity whereby culture in all its diversity is something that young people starting out on making films have the angles of approach to develop. And there was a recent anecdote which amused me a lot when I was in Amman in Jordan, and we were doing a workshop, and they said, oh, we have an unexpected guest tonight. And it turned out to be Werner Herzog, no less. He was in the area finding locations in the Dead Sea. And so he came along and he talked, and there were questions and answers with the film students in the workshop. And at the end, one of the students said, well, Herr Herzog, what would your advice be to a young student who wants to be a filmmaker of your brilliance? And Herzog did not pause. He just replied by saying, read, read, read.